Does anyone know how many national championships Alabama has? Does anyone know if all 12 titles the Crimson Tide claim are legitimate? Surprisingly, there is information which discounts many of the 12 titles. Alabama claims 12 national championships. However, they should actually only claim 5, as the other 7 should be discounted. This is a result of obscure polls and confusion on how to claim a title. Essentially, each school determines which years they are national champions, and different standards are set by different schools. The NCAA provides a list of the selections and which entities select them. The information I will be sharing with you today comes from the official NCAA record book, poll results such as coaches poll and the AP poll, as well as writings from a sports analyst. We will also be discussing consensus picks, which is defined in sports terms by the real consensus report, the truth behind the numbers, as majority opinion. Before I began this speech, I was actually confused on how many titles Alabama should legitimately claim. But after researching, I am here to tell you they actually have 5 and not 12 championships. Today we will look at Alabama's 5 national championships, which are legitimate. We will also explore misconceptions with Alabama's 5 retroactively added national titles, and why they should be discounted. And finally, we will look at 2 claimed titles in which Alabama didn't win their bowl games but benefited from early polls at the time. Alabama, without question, rightfully has claimed to 5 national championships. 1961, Bama went undefeated, was chosen #1 in the AP Bowl and the Coaches Poll. 1979, Alabama was voted unanimously as the national champion by the NCAA. Bama went on to #1 in all major polls, including AP and UPI. 1992, again, Alabama is voted #1 in all major polls. In 1965, Alabama was 4th entering the bowl season. However, 3 teams ahead of them lost their bowl games. Alabama beat Nebraska in the Orange Bowl, and the AP poll placed Alabama as the champion. 1978, Alabama won the most consensus polls, and Alabama went on to beat #1 Penn State in the Sugar Bowl. All major polls placed Alabama as the winner. Now that we have seen which titles are legitimate, let's look at the confusion associated with the 5 titles added retroactively. 5 of the Crimson Tide's claimed national championships were actually added retroactively by Wayne Atchison. Wayne Atchison was Alabama's sports information director from 1983 through 1987, and later the associated director of the Tide's donor program. He added 5 titles to the 1983 Alabama Media Guide, even though 1982 Media Guide only listed 6 titles. In 1925, Alabama was undefeated during the season and went on to beat Washington in the Rose Bowl. But there were no coaches polls or Associated Press at the time. All decisions for Alabama to be placed #1 were made retroactively. The NCAA recognizes Alabama and Dartmouth as national bowl champions. In 1926, Alabama actually tied with Stanford and the Rose Bowl, and both teams finished undefeated. The Dickinson mathematical point system was the only system used at the time, and it ranked Stanford as #1. The NCAA recognizes both Alabama and Stanford as bowl champions. In 1930, Alabama was #3 and went on to beat #2 Washington in the Rose Bowl. The NCAA recognizes Notre Dame as a national bowl champion. In 1934, Alabama was co-champion of the SEC, but finished #3 in the AP poll. All of the consensus votes picks Minnesota. Again, the NCAA recognizes Minnesota as a national champion. The 1941 championship was still added to Alabama's national title by Atchison, even though Alabama ranked 20th and had 2 more losses than Minnesota. Alabama lost to Mississippi State and Vanderbilt. The Tide finished in the poll behind 4 other SEC teams. Only the Howgate poll ranked Alabama at #1. Minnesota topped Duke in the final poll, and Minnesota won all the consensus picks. Wayne Atchison justified this 1941 championship for Alabama as it was clear this poll thought Alabama was the best team, referring to the Howgate poll. Let's pause for a moment to summarize Alabama's titles so far. First, we identified 5 legitimate titles the Crimson Tide should claim. Second, we explored the confusion with 5 titles Atchison added retroactively, and reasons why they should be discounted. We are now going to move on to two more acclaimed championships in which the Crimson Tide, who benefited from early polls, didn't even win their bowl games and therefore are not national champions. According to Michael Collins, a sports analyst for the Bleacher Report, most expect the winner to be champions of their conference, bowl winners, and undefeated. Yet in 1964 and 1973, Alabama did not win their bowl games and benefited from polls taken before the bowl seasons. In 1964, the AP Bowl and the UPI released their picks prior to the bowl games, and is the perfect example of how the Crimson Tide benefited from the polling system at the time. As a result, Alabama was chosen as the winner, even though Alabama lost 21-17 in Texas in the Orange Bowl. Arkansas was the only undefeated team and received most poll bowl rankings. Number one, including the Football Writers Association, the NCAA recognizes Arkansas, Alabama, and Notre Dame as consensus national champions. In 1973, the UPI poll picked Alabama for number one prior to the bowl games, and is yet another example of how Alabama benefited from early polls. As a result of this poll conflict, UPI permanently changed their voting until after the bowl games the following year. Alabama lost to Notre Dame, who was in the Sugar Bowl 24-23. The AP poll, which by now had permanently changed their voting system until after the bowl games, chose Notre Dame as the national champions as well as other major polls. The NCAA recognizes Notre Dame as the national champions. As fellow football fans, I hope you were able to see now that Crimson Tide does not actually have the right to claim 12 national championships. But by looking at the evidence outlined in my speech, we were able to point out 5 legitimate titles and discount 7 championships. Today we identified 5 titles and the Tide actually does have claim to. We also explored the confusion with the 5 retroactively added titles and why they should be discounted. Finally, we looked at 2 years in which Crimson Tide didn't even win their bowl games but benefited from early poll voting. The Crimson Tide's 12 national championships are constantly debated, and it is my hope that now you will be able to point out which ones you feel are legitimate or not.